my fellow comic book collectors. It's Alan, the Comic Collector Geek, and I've been thinking. I've been thinking about this question for a long, long time, and I kind of wanted to kind of ask the community, what do they think about this idea? And the idea is, what makes a comic cool? Like, I know what makes comics cool to me. Like, you see some of these comics behind me, and you probably think, oh, whatever. They're not Amazing Spider-Man #1. They're not whatever. Some big Grail book, and you might think, why does he even have these books behind him? Why does he think they're cool? And I was thinking about how different people have different books behind them, and they'll think these books are really, really cool, and you'll wonder, why are they cool? Why are they cool? And what makes comics in general cool, and what makes particular comics cool? So I was thinking about this idea, and this is the idea that I was kind of thinking about, because coolness, at the end of the day, is what determines much of the value of comics. If we don't think it's cool, we're not going to buy it. So the more coolness, and maybe scarcity and all that kind of other stuff, the more value a comic will have. And some books are instantly cool. Like you see, for example, a really, really great Good Girl cover, or just a classic cover right off the bat. You say, wow, that's a cool cover. You just intrinsically feel that desire to buy that book because it's just got a cool cover, like some sexy girl on the cover. A good example of that is Tank Girl #1. It's a #1 that gives it a little bit of coolness, but is a cool cover. It's a crazy cover, and it just catches your eye. You just say, wow, that something about that sticks out beyond the other comics of the era or of the week that are on the newsstand. And you say, that's a cool cover. But, beyond that, you got, that's one thing, but does it make it really a cool book? Maybe. But other things that, sometimes it's not just about the cover, right? It's about the characters inside. Sometimes it's about maybe a first appearance. As collectors, we like to challenge ourselves to get those first appearances. And I think, oh, wow, certain books, are cool just because it's a first appearance. So like I think of this book. It's a cool book because it's a first appearance. And it's got the character on the cover as well. It just makes it a cool book through and through. And it's a rare book. It's a hard book to actually find, believe it or not. So it's a cool book on multiple levels. But what is cool to me, or even a group of collectors, might not be cool to the general masses. So, for example, like an Action 1, that's super cool. Everyone can agree, Superman is an iconic character. Everybody knows him, and that adds that extra level of coolness. And the value, even if it's like an artificial number, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the book. Any of these books are all worth the same. They're all worth the same because, they're just a book at the end of the day. But what gives it value is how much desire there is from other people to buy that book. So an Action 1 is cool, not only because it's the first appearance of Superman, but because it is got that prestige of being worth so much. And it's almost like self-perpetuating, thing where it becomes like, a self-actualizing, where you say, oh, it's worth $1 million, so people are willing to pay $1 million just because they perceive that value. So there's that element of coolness because of the value of a book. This is, for example, a fairly valuable book, but it could be worth more if people felt like the character was cooler, if there was maybe a little bit more rare, if there was elements that maybe the cover was better, things like that would add to that coolness factor and add to the value. So what I'm really trying to get at is, what I was thinking about this was, if you can sort of look at a book and maybe flip through it and kind of figure it out, you can maybe buy coolness. Instead of buying the comic, you're buying coolness. And it could be the case that you could predict, based on how well you can predict that coolness factor, whether a book is going to become more valuable over time or less valuable over time. I always think of like, I didn't bring it, but I should have, Avengers Annual 10. That is a great example of a cool book, but not a cool book. It's one where it's the first appearance of Rogue, very popular character, but because of the cover, it's not a great cover. It's really, really iffy cover. Some people like it. I never liked it. I thought it was just too busy, not a really great cover. And a lot of people agree with me. So the aesthetics in there. But that is a cool book because of the first appearance of Rogue. So, but if it was a better cover, probably it'd be worth a lot more because of that extra coolness of having a great first appearance and a great cover. So if you could sort of kind of look at a book, look at all the factors, like, oh, does it have a great cover? Does it have a great character? Does it have all these things? You can almost predict whether or not it'll be a valuable book. Another thing that makes things cool is the scarcity. And one book that I have that's a very scarce book, only 3 known to exist, and all of them are really low grade, really hard book to find, is this one. And this is especially cool for Canadians, okay, because this is the first appearance of Nirvana of the Northern Lights. Canadians' first female superhero. So it's a kind of a cool book for Canadians. It's a Canadian white. It's got a lot of history behind it. Extra cool. We even have stamps devoted to this character. It is a cool character for Canadians. So there's that localized coolness, and there's that scarcity coolness factor that, oh, I have something that nobody else has. If there's only 3 known to exist, makes it a little bit cooler than something that there's millions of copies out there and it's easy to find. A good example of that would be like X-Men, the modern X-Men #1. Cool book. Actually, it kind of was very symbolic of the 90s. But there's so many copies. There's 5 million copies that were created that, you can't put, if you put that on your back wall behind you, maybe you wouldn't be considered that cool because it's not, it's just so plentiful that it's not a cool book based on that commonality of the book. It's just the fact that everybody has a copy. You probably get born and then somebody hands you a copy of it because it's just so common. So there's that element of that scarcity making something cool. But so the idea is like, if you can figure out all these factors, almost like a little algorithm. I like the whole science idea of this, where you could scientifically calculate, okay, it has like first appearance, it's rare, it's, it's all these things. And based on this coolness equation, you could basically say, okay, it's worth X dollars. Just like, that'd be really just an interesting idea. Now, there are some books that I think the coolness is much more personal. And I'll give you an example of that. Like when I was growing up, my parents made me only would let me read certain types of books. They wouldn't let me read superhero books for the most part. They would only let me read like Donald Ducks and the cartoon books. And generally, I really enjoyed watching cartoons. I remember whenever I would be sick and have to stay at home, my parents would rent me a bunch of videos. This is my babysitting that they would give me. They'd rent me a bunch of videos like of cartoons, like the cartoon stories, and I'd watch those all day. And that would be my day off while I was recovering from whatever ailment I had. And so I was kind of nostalgic to those characters. And I think nostalgia plays a major role in coolness. The more people that are nostalgic to it, obviously, the better the value will be. A good example of a book that I'm nostalgic for, maybe because I was a bit of a loner kid and I can kind of relate to this character a bit, is Casper the Ghost. I really like Casper the Ghost. As I said, I was into the cartoons. and I was into this idea of the lonely ghost, and nobody wants to be his friend, but I'd be his friend, you know. It's just like, just a very cool character. And this is his first appearance. He's on the cover. It's got a whole bunch of coolness factors built into it. So for me, this is like kind of like a good example of how nostalgia, rareness, key first appearance all plays into making this a cool book, and makes it a valuable book as a result. So that's some of the ideas that I had around that. Another thing that I find kind of it comes into coolness factor is something where it is very, very niche. I know that sounds weird because usually with value, you want to have something that has mass appeal, okay? But what I mean by niche is that it's a rare item, and that it's something that appeals to sort of a more sophisticated audience. I'm not saying that, you know, they have like a refined taste in terms of comics. A lot of the Golden Age books are like that. You know, they don't have the mass appeal, but the people that are the consumers of those Golden Age books are the types of people who, because they see it as like a reformed form of art or whatever, that they're collectors of history or whatever it is, that they're willing to spend bigger money for those rare pieces. And a lot of the time, those kind of like more elite, I'm not saying elitist, but more like refined collectors, are the type of people who collect a lot of artists. Like, for example, Matt Baker, L.B. Cole, you know, those collectors that go after those names. Even in the modern era, we see this, you know, like with Dave Stevens and Adam Hughes and J. Scott Campbell. There are, you know, that kind of like that refined taste people that, you know, that go after those artists that they like. They say, oh, I really like this artwork. I've developed a desire to, an appreciation for this artist. It's almost the way art collectors within the, you know, paintings and all that kind of stuff see coolness. So there is that within the comic book community as well, that there's this refined taste, aesthetic taste that that can be catered to within comics, that people collect based on their artists. And one step further in that is the idea of collecting the first appearance of that artist. Not just the first appearance of a character, but a first appearance of that artist's work. And that's like that extra level of coolness on top. It's like sort of finding the very first Picasso, you know, or the very first Da Vinci, or something that just is like, oh, wow, that's extra cool because it's his first work. And a good example of that is a Golden Age artist that is kind of very popular, Frank Frazetta. And this is his first artwork, and he was young when he produced this. He was like still a teenager, and he produced this little snowman. that was his contribution. But Frank Frazetta is now known for like these elaborate art, like sort of the Conan ones would be his stuff, and the famous funnies, and all these really brilliant, elaborate paintings that were used as covers for comics. But to have his first appearance, his first artwork in a comic, is extra cool. So this is an example of that, where you get that first Frank Frazetta. Yeah, so these are like my thoughts on coolness. I'd like to kind of ask you, the audience watching this, what do you think? What elements do you think make comics cooler? Like, because we have to think about it logically in a way. Like, what makes this comic worth $1,000 and this worth $1? Like, what's going on there? There has to be something. And sometimes we can actually almost say day one that this comic is going to go through the moon. It's sort of like when Blood Hunt came out. That's a great example of instant coolness and instant value as a result. Because when they came out with those exclusive variants that mimicked EC comics, um, there was an instant appeal there. And it appealed to people like myself that collect Golden Age. It appealed to the modern collector who is like, oh, that's something different. It appealed to, the older generation, because if you go to comic shops nowadays, it's mostly older people. That this is more of an adult story. It's going to be more gore. The fact that they had it as like you could either get the tame version or the cool version. The cool version with like blood and guts and whatever, more extreme stuff. And with this cool extra variant cover with the decapitated head, of Thor on the cover. Just wow, that is cool. All these things make that comic instantly valuable. It went from being like maybe a $5-10 book to being several $100s overnight. And if we can sort of spot these cool things, maybe we could kind of capitalize on it and take advantage of that instant coolness and value that is going to be associated. It's hard to predict, but if you can sort of spot coolness, then you can potentially make good money on it, like capitalize on this coolness effect. So just some ideas. I was just thinking about this. I have all these ideas running around in my head, and this is one of them. Like, what makes a comic cool? What makes this comic better than this comic? So I'm just ideas that I had. Love to hear your feedback. Put it in the comments below. Again, I appreciate that you watched this far. Bye for now.